Hey there, I'm Lee Ullman here with some big news from the National Young Farmers Coalition. We're partnering with Heritage Radio Network on a special season of The Farm Report. It's all about what's happening with the Farm Bill and how it impacts farmers and eaters.
I am growing diversified vegetables on land that's been in our family for 150 years.
And so with the pandemic, gentrification, property values going up, we had to sell the land and we lost it.
Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind this massive piece of legislation that shapes how we grow our food, what we eat, and so much more.
The problems we have had, those are things that come from earlier Farm Bill and USDA policy, right? Like Earl Butz, get big or get out.
You know, it's my responsibility to know not only what I'm eating, but then like how that all came to be. And realize like, wow, like this piece of legislation, all this money, like it's technically something that I support as a taxpayer.
While Congress debates the next Farm Bill, this is not just an invitation to listen. It's a call to action. Be part of the conversation. Subscribe to the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Today's program was brought to you by Roth Cheese, a pioneer in the U.S. specialty cheese movement. For more information, visit rothcheese.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. We're a member-supported food radio network broadcasting over 35 weekly shows live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. Join our hosts as they lead you through the world of craft brewing, behind the scenes of the restaurant industry, inside the battle over school food, and beyond. Find us at heritageradionetwork.org.
Hello and welcome to A Hungry Society, Season 5 of A Hungry Society.
Yes, it's so exciting. That's so exciting.
This is a show where we talk about food, food media, and so much more. Today's guest is very special.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
It is Nasser Jab of Komeeda.
Thank you.
And so the way A Hungry Society usually works is I, have this intro where I list all your credentials and accomplishments and all sorts of stuff. But I'm going to let you talk about your company, Komeeda.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm a big fan of the show and a big fan of you, as you know. And Komeeda is a marketplace that is dedicated to food experiences. And our goal is to elevate the experiential dining experience for guests. And at the same time, also empower food entrepreneurs by earning more money, getting more exposure, and becoming economically sustainable. But also at the core of Komeeda, we're very dedicated to social impact. So although some things are, marketed or sometimes things are not marketed, every dining experience that we do helps empower people who are very vulnerable, and especially economically. So this is what we do. We're technically between Open Table and Airbnb experiences, and we're trying to bring dining into the future.
Yeah, Komeeda is such a cool organization. It's
thank you.
It creates some of the, I feel like, most impactful dining experiences you can have right now. And as I was getting ready for this interview, I was looking at all these stories about, the chefs that you've had. You did this series called Displaced Kitchens.
That's correct.
Where it was a refugee chef, a very small number of diners. Cooking food from their background and having like a small number of people from the city come, and tickets were only $65.
Yeah, 65 to 75, and that was like on the basic level. We've done dinners where plates were $500. But the truth is that what we were able to prove is that people are willing to listen to narratives of food. And Bourdain, rest in peace, was able to prove that through his show. He basically said, here's the platform, take the mic, tell your story. And that really inspired us. So now, and every time we do an experiential dining or basically an experience with social impact related to it, we always bring the narrative of the person cooking to the guest. And that is important because people in general don't care about geopolitics, but people connect on a human level. And they want to help. People are good, but people are busy to go protesting or donate a check that feels not necessarily so personal to an organization, although these things are very, very important to happen. But people want to give direct action. So the way that we thought about it is that why don't we bring in people who are being attacked, although for issues that are not their fault, people who are being vilified, and bring them and have them tell their story from their own perspective through an amazing curated dining experience. And the response was really, really surprising even to us. I mean, the dinner went international. Not only that it started in New York in a basement with 10 people and went to Austin, to DC, other cities adopted it. We are now working with the United States government and the Center for Institutional Private Enterprise to bring economic livelihood to refugees and Turkish people, also Turkish nationals, in Istanbul by providing them a space to do curated experiences and build businesses through this economic incubator, which we call LIFE, the LIFE program. So even on a government level, there was an issue of gastro-diplomacy. So food is empowering, right? Not just on a personal level, but also on organizational and government level.
So take me back to that first dinner, that first Komeeda dinner. What was that like? Were you like nervous? Did you not know how it would turn out?
So the first Komeeda dinner wasn't a social impact dinner. The way the company started is that our co-founder Jabber was traveling in Europe and was staying at a hostel and doing the thing that you do when you graduate college and want to go discover yourself.
And go backpack through Europe.
Yeah, something that I was never able to do. So I'm always jealous that he was able to do that. But you stay at a hostel or couch surf at the time. This is like 2008, 2009, and people, sometimes get up in the morning and they have breakfast together at this hostel or at this couch surfing, hotel, and they get to know each other. And backpackers tend to build this connection that we are in this adventure together. We're connecting. You meet different people, and it's a great experience. So Jabber came back and wanted to replicate that through Komeeda, and it started that way. And those things are great. But then what we discovered is that the possibilities are limitless on how people want to get together through food. So sure, people want to get together for, social impact reasons. For example, when the Trump administration cut the aid to the United Nations Relief Workers Agency, which now they actually zeroed it completely. It was in the Washington Post a couple of days ago. They are completely ending the funding to the program, which is jeopardizing schools in the refugee camps. We were able, through one of our super hosts, to raise around $25,000 to support the organization. But also people want to come for fun. We also have, chefs that work in the city who have a great following, who have trained at the best restaurants to come do a big showdown. And the showdown is like a theme experience. So this month we have a taco barbecue showdown. So people come, they get on the step and repeat, they drink, there's music, and they eat great food, and then they vote for their best chef. Also, we have the other level. Let's say you are passionate about one thing in particular and you want to build it. Let's say you are a chef at one of the 5-star restaurants in New York, but can't afford to open your own restaurant. And your dream is to do one. So you do curated pop-ups with us. And eventually you make enough money, get enough following that you open up your space. And with that, you don't have to worry about running the business, which is in New York, at least, is a dangerous thing. I mean, like 80% of restaurants fail. I had one that failed. And it's not easy, especially when you're a small business owner and you're by yourself and you probably know how to cook the food, but operating the space is a whole different story.
Right. So two things there. First, like that term pop-up, that I was about to say that popped up over and over again. That term is used so much to talk about Komeeda's events and the dinners that you host. And I feel like it doesn't quite encapsulate everything that Komeeda does. And it is kind of this, we think of pop-ups as these things where, chefs are just in the space for a very short amount of time and they're cooking, dishes that you don't get to have in that space often. But it takes on a whole different meaning when the chef cooking it has been displaced. They're popping up in a certain space because they have been forcibly
removed
pushed
from the location.
Exactly.
And not necessarily through political conflict. It could be just because rent increases. I mean, to be very, very technical in the most boring way possible, Komeeda at the heart of it is a payment processing marketplace that its inventory is food experiences. Now, how does Komeeda empower restaurateurs? Right? Rent is very expensive, and a lot of restaurants fail because they can't pay the rent. And now minimum wage is going to be at $15 an hour in December. And I'm very, very strong advocate for minimum wage. People need to live. But you can't survive as a small business. I mean, those are real issues that people talk about. So there's going to be a systematic shift in the system. Some places will close, and that business or livelihood is gone. And especially if you don't have any of our skill, you're not going to maneuver into technology. Like, these things don't happen like that. What we were able to do is provide for you a space where you don't have to worry about the rent, because we have the space, or we can find the space, and also the cost is very minimal. So you're able to earn a living, have a quote-unquote pop-up, which is basically you have the staff, you have the kitchen that you need, but you don't have to worry about paying rent at the end of the month for that specific location.
Right.
That allows you to make money. Now, you can actually do this for 30 days a month. Like, you could do this every day and not necessarily be committed to a lease. That is important because that is the economic empowerment we're trying to give. A very similar comparison, if you will, is that during the 2008 crisis, Airbnb was able to allow people who lost their jobs to rent out their homes so they can earn a living because they couldn't afford the rent, right? So this is one angle how we're very, very similar on that front. And I keep comparing ourselves to Airbnb because we're very much dedicated to the similar mission. They're dedicated on travel, and now they have done experiences, and we're doing it solely with food. Another way is that people want to just earn income but don't necessarily want to commit to a full-time job. So one of the things that we look at, for example, is gentrified neighborhoods. Gentrified neighborhoods is a big topic that people talk about. And I myself went through gentrification, not only in Palestine, but also in West Harlem when I was living in there around 2008, 2009. But these neighborhoods have a lot of history. And people get really upset when they see new faces in their neighborhood. But at the same time, these new faces come in and bring economic opportunities. There's like a debate going back and forth on how that would look like. So we were like, okay, if we go back and forth on this debate, there are really no solutions to what can be done. But how can we empower the local residents who were there prior to gentrification to adapt to the new reality or the economic reality in their neighborhood today? So for example, in Spanish Harlem, it's considered the graffiti mecca of the world, right? So we do a graffiti food tour, and you can eat chopped cheese. Now, chopped cheese sandwiches became famous because Bourdain put them on the show, and it's very much a New York local thing, but no one knows that it's actually started by a Yemeni bodega deli. And he was basing it on a Yemeni sandwich or a Yemeni dish that he was making it, but putting it on a sandwich and selling it. So we do these tours, but what does that do? That we hire locals from the neighborhood. We talk about the history of Spanish Harlem. We don't shy away from the economic realities that's facing Spanish Harlem. And also, we take them to little spots around the area for food businesses that have been there before the gentrification. They're just trying to survive. So they get exposure. The restaurants get more following. People take pictures of the food because, again, as my friend Helen said, people are looking for camera-first food. They want to take pictures. The likes for the gram is really...
Do it for the gram.
Do it for the gram. So... We are trying to not necessarily change your narrative of doing things for social media or things alike. We want you to be empowered doing it that way, but the result of your actions actually is helping people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and incredibly important not to shy away from those like aspects of addressing conflict of like our changing world and, you know, unjust like political things that are happening all around the world. And I think Komeeda does that in a way that kind of harnesses like people want, I agree that people are mostly good and want to help out, but they don't quite know how to do that.
No.
And I think that Komeeda helps them do that.
For sure. We make it easy. People want to see the direct action of their help. And at the same time, we want to do it within their daily actions because I realize this. You can ask people to help out, and people want to help out. But if they're working 80 hours a week and they have a family, they're not going to have the time to do it. But if you ask them for something that's within their reality, whether they're within their domain of work or whatever their skill or through their just daily activities, then it works out that way. People are going to go out to eat anyway. It's just that where do you want to spend your dollar? And the truth is that like if we talk about the public in general, the palates of Americans have increased in the past 15, 20 years. I think maybe we can begin with the shift when Bourdain wrote his New Yorker article in 99,
Right.
2000.
And people were fascinated by this whole
Yeah.
different world of
And
kitchens
also-
and restaurants.
And also with Danny Meyer opening up Union Square Cafe for the first time. Before Union Square, you couldn't get a nice restaurant downtown. It had to be all in Midtown. So what did that say? That if you wanted to have a sophisticated food palette, you have to have a certain amount of money, things of the sort, geographical location, the distinction on that front. And at the same time, people went forward. They started, the diets come out every day, but how do they? Yeah, exactly. So
I'm nodding like
Yeah.
furiously over here.
of course, yeah. So, but now I feel like people have developed a sophisticated food palette, and but they're not just interested in hearing about a famous chef. They want to really hear about where this food is coming from. Is it organic or not? What are these things that make it organic? I mean, we talk about being organic or not. Some farmers actually grow amazing product but cannot afford the licenses to make things organic. So they have to sell their things for cheaper, which makes the farm unable to sustain. So people are now more conscious and more socially conscious, trying to empower the people who are, vulnerable. So we allow them to do that on our platform by giving them the entire resource when it comes to food to be able to do that through a ticketed event. It could be anything between $25. It could be anything between $75. It could be $125. But and we've done things that are huge. I mean, we just recently did with one of our partners an entire plant-based catering.
Wow.
And to us, that's important because we have to think about plant-based food. How do we sustain? How do we consume less meat? I mean, that's actually important. People usually want to be on the attack. Oh, you're a vegan and a vegetarian. They get this bad rap. But the truth of the matter is that there is life sustainability aside from the humanitarian aspect of it.
Right.
And we must always take into consideration the morality of what we're trying to achieve. And is this good for the society or not?
Yeah, it's there's so many moving parts and things that we're all starting to think about when we go out to eat. It's not just sitting down to a plate of food. It's politics, it's race, it's class, it's gender, it's everything kind of comes together.
But if you still want to go spend the $500 on a great experience, you still can.
You
on
can do
Komeeda
that, yeah.
and Komeeda and somewhere else. We can't alienate people, right? Like I still want the folks that go to 11 Madison Park and to the French Laundry to be able to come to our dinners, and they have. To be honest with you, we had one of the Syrian refugees that was 6 months back due on her rent. The crowd that came in and paid back her rent through a very high-ticketed plate, to be honest with you, even in reality, I don't think our food experience was fantastic because it wasn't worth $1,000 a plate. We didn't have fine wines and things of the sort, but people came and paid that ticket item primarily because they know that their payment is going all to help this woman escape poverty, who just literally escaped the war, had her brother killed, things of the sort. So it's important to know that people want to do good, and we bring in all classes, not necessarily just activists, but also people who are politically apolitical or whatever the case may be. We just bring people who want to dine and have a good time.
So, Naz, in your wildest, biggest dreams, what does Komeeda look like in 5 years?
Well, I hope that we are going to be doing 500 pop-ups across the world a day. I want us to be the Airbnb of food experiences on multiple fronts. And with that, of course, I would be much dedicated to food sustainability. How can we help organizations like the World Food Program and UNHCR and RC? And we have been helping them now through doing dinners for them to raise awareness, but how can we help out more? There has to be a bridging of the gap between entrepreneurial companies and corporations and NGOs, because if they come together, they can solve real problems. So I would like to dedicate that to food. Particularly here. But in terms of the business front, I definitely want us to be a global dining experience where everybody from around the world, wherever they go, wherever they travel, will book a Komeeda experience, meet new people, meet new chefs, hear new stories, and experience food and culture in a completely different way. And particularly in like cities where they can eat like a local, right? And it's not just like coming in and like trying new spots, but also listening to the daily narratives of the people they're eating with. And that's really worth something.
Yeah, that's worth a lot, and I think that's really beautiful and a good goal.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more with Naz of Komeeda.
Thank you.
Today's program was brought to you by Roth Cheese, a pioneer in the U.S. specialty cheese movement. Roth is in its 25th year of making specialty cheese in the rolling hills of southern Wisconsin. With strong Swiss heritage, Roth is best known for its award-winning Alpine-style cheeses under the name Grand Cru. Fresh Wisconsin milk, combined with expertise in affinage, is how Roth creates high-quality, great-tasting cheese year after year. In 2016, hard work paid off when out of over 2,000 contenders, Roth Grand Cru Sur Choix was named World Champion at the World Cheese Championship. For more information, visit rothcheese.com.
Okay, so we're back with A Hungry Society. And Naz, you have a really interesting backstory. I feel like we talked a lot about Komeeda.
Yeah.
You've been a restaurant owner,
Yes, ma'am.
a filmmaker,
Yes, ma'am.
chef.
I don't give myself that title because I'm not trained at the culinary institutes, but I am definitely inspired by chefs. At best, I am a good cook. Some of my friends would say not good. But yes, I would say that I've definitely have been exposed to food. But I do have to admit that for a long time I had no palate. And
What do you mean when you say you didn't have a palate?
So, coming into the United States and being an immigrant, I didn't have a lot of money. And access to food for me was through food trucks. And it was just very basic. I mean, now food trucks are much more sophisticated than they were maybe 12 years ago. And one of my first inspirations when it comes down to food was that I had a friend of mine named Faris. And Faris was a very, very good cook. And he loved food, and he was very passionate about food. And he would teach me things about food. And at the same time, we worked in restaurants when we were in college. So we had access to learn certain things, but I was looking at it as a job as a means to an end, where he was looking at it from a different perspective and learning from the cooks and learning things. So he would come back into the house and teach us new stuff. And I would say I didn't really develop a palate until I started working at Ilili, which I truly think is the best Middle Eastern restaurant in the world. And not only that, I think it's also an institution. What Philippe Massoud, chef owner Philippe Massoud, did to change the narratives of Middle Eastern food at that place is phenomenal. So through working at Ilili, and I wasn't in the kitchen, I was on the wait staff.
Okay.
I was able to learn more about the stories of food, how food can be paired, what are the ingredients that go in to make something that I grew up eating all my life become different. Eventually, when I opened up my own place, that was basically my training ground, if you will, to play and mix with things. And I had to learn how to cook because at one point I couldn't afford to hire one. So we had to bring in a consultant chef that really helped us out. I've learned along the way. And eventually I started doing it more and more and more, that now I have dinners that I pair things. Like one of my favorite books to use is the Flavor Matrix that just came out between ICE and IBM, pairing new flavors. My mission actually is to, personally, outside of Komeeda, is how can we take Palestinian food into the future. For us, our cuisine has always been very classic. So if you look at the cookbooks, and one of my favorite cookbooks author is Judy Qalla, who just released Palestine on a Plate, and she's coming up with Baladi, which is her new book on October 13th. She preserves the identity of Palestinian food. And that is important because, like, my mom, for example, does embroidery. and Judy does the cooking, and everything is very classic because that's how it was when society stopped, and there was a shift in societies. The country changed, and people got displaced, and Israel was created, and Palestine was lost, things of the sort. So, with that in mind, a lot of people in the Palestinian community, hold on to their roots. So when we started the restaurant, for example, a small, minor story is that my partner was from the Zalatimo family. And the Zalatimo family have been making baklava since 1830s in Jerusalem. They're the oldest baklava makers in the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they're so famous that when 1967 happened and they got kicked out of Jerusalem and went to Jordan, they relaunched as, sweet shops, like the Gadafi of the Middle East. What's interesting is that if you ask any Palestinian around the world how can they relate to Palestine, they'll always talk about the Zalatimo baklava. Because to them, that is a reminder of home, a reminder of identity. Even if they've been in Chile and don't even speak Arabic for the past 60 years, or if they've been in the United States, or if they've been in Jordan or anywhere around the world. So food is always relatable in that sense. And Judy also does the same thing with curating even recipes that I have not heard of from different parts of Palestine, because again, when we were displaced in 1948 and again in 1967, we were not modern cities. So there was not necessarily any communication or visiting from one city to the next. It would take sometimes 3-4 days to get to the next one. So what happened is that there are dishes in certain villages that you won't get another one. And that, bringing those narratives and stories together is important, which is why, I'm a big fan of her stuff. But for me, I want to take it to the next, which I'm very inspired by Fran Andrea and, the molecular gastronomy movement. Although people to say, that's done for now. But for me, I want to do see-through kibbeh. It sounds like, why are you doing that? But it's a lot of fun. When I play with, the agents, whether there's agar or I'm doing a calcium bath for to do a spherical olive, oil that's made into into this little bubble that you can eat. It's amazing. It's fascinating. And how can we do that for Palestinian food? It's not necessarily as sustainable as doing things like what Judy's doing, because again, she does everyday cooking that people can use even in restaurants or home. And I'm trying to do just a crazy thing where sometimes it takes an hour to make one little appetizer.
Yeah, using dry ice and foam.
Yeah, and you need equipment, lab equipment, and it's not necessarily as sustainable, but I enjoy that because then there is the future and then the present and the past. And this is where that comes in. And so that's
So speaking of when you first moved here, we're coming up on 17 years for you in America?
2 weeks before 9/11.
Yeah, which was, wow, what a time to come to New York.
It was definitely a reverse cultural shock. I went to an American Quaker high school, and I was more ingrained in the American philosophy and history more than my own identity. I know more about the Lewis and Clark expedition more than Palestinian narratives. It wasn't until
and this
here,
was in
Palestine. Yeah,
okay.
Because we were an American taught school. The idea is that my parents, didn't have a lot of money, but they wanted to secure my economic future. And the way to do it is that if they spent money on my education in an American school, then I would get in place into an American college, and therefore I would get into a job. And, just like any person of color trying to secure education for their future, there's a reason why people of color end up as bankers, engineers, and doctors, because those are all risk-averse, careers for the most part. Maybe not banking, but engineers, doctors, lawyers, where you can escape poverty, you can still be in the upper middle class and make good money. But for me, coming here, and I went to Baruch for business school, and it was the best experience of my life because I was able to get an education. So I'm very thankful without necessarily the high cost of college. But at the same time, I was able to build this entrepreneurial skills by learning. When I learned finance and economics, I couldn't subscribe to the banking system and how it is. And also I graduated during the crisis, so there was no jobs anyway. So maybe it was fate to get into food and entrepreneurial things like that. But for me, personally, always talking about food security. And these issues were important. For example, in 2008, when they're talking about the increase of prices of soy goods, that affected cereal goods, right? And these, so people who were living on 3 meals a day dropped down to 1. Those things are important. Food security is always byproduct of what the market is standing. So my exposure was on that front, and I had to learn my identity through that, because then I had to defend myself when people talked about the Iraq War, when people started vilifying Middle Easterners, when people started talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I have to find answers. And I had to find answers not from a shouting, slogans perspective. I had to find it from a real, meaningful, intellectual standpoint. And that happens mostly through economics, finance, and issues that relate to that. Whether it's food security, access to capital, what are the reasons that these things happen? Not everything is black and white. I know most people want to look at it in black and white. And sometimes even we present, narratives as black and white because it's easier for people to understand. But everything is actually gray. And there are these back and forth. But I realized a few things. Poverty is colorblind, And one of the things that I'm very dedicated to, is that how can we escape poverty?
So you found that business was a way to kind of present or discuss with people where you come from and kind of the turmoil going on in the area.
Yeah, I mean, business is also blind. People are interested in making, profit at the end, right? But I was recently reading Robert McNamara's book on the war in Vietnam, and despite what his point of view and other points of view on the war, one of the things that he talked about is that at Harvard Business School, where he was, is that he learned that you don't necessarily have to be bad to do business. You could do business with a good heart. Right? And I truly believe in that. When people talk about Adam Smith's capitalism, they forget that he also wrote the moral sentiment. That it's not like capitalism, not this exploitation, this and this and that. And this is something that I also used to believe when I was a younger leftist in college, when I was like on the very, very much left. But the truth is that you could do good through capital. It's just that how you choose to do it, the culture that you build around it. And I think now we are a generation, especially even the people younger than us and, the early millennials now, they're very much dedicated to that. So when they start companies, they care about these things like Warby Parker or, Tom's Shoes or, you name many of them. And they care about these things. And that's important because why not? Why can't you do a sustainable business model that also helps the community?
I'm curious, what were some of the biggest differences between how you ate when you were in Palestine and then how you ate when you came to America?
Oh, thank you. I think one of the things that, when you ask this question, one of the things that really come to my mind is actually access to goods. So that's really important. One of the things that, for example, for us is that because of the occupation, sometimes access to food supply is limited. Not only because there is no money or sometimes the goods are too expensive to get, but also because there are visible checkpoints that don't allow us to get access to product. Right. So, for example, given the fact that I was in the West Bank, fish was super expensive. You have to be super rich to get fish. And even at that time, you couldn't get fish because people have, there wasn't enough market for it. But at the same time, the fishermen in Gaza were not allowed to go out fishing beyond a certain kilometer distance because then they would be shot at by the Navy, right? So it's important to look at how also the geopolitical situation affects the livelihood of farmers and fishermen, but also that affects the access to goods. So, growing up, I didn't necessarily have access to foie gras, right? Although there are villages that ate escargot. I mean, that was their thing because they were like French peasants at one point.
Oh,
or like,
I was about to ask, like, how did escargot get there?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like that's an interesting thing. So, the Palestinian society is divided into Muslims and Christians, and technically, Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem and Nazareth, and that's basically where we are. So, there's a lot of people who have come through the land. Whether, from the West or the East, there's every denomination of humanity has passed through this land. And because of that, food also came along. So, artichokes, escargot, like certain villages would eat certain things depending on who resided in that town before. In my town, unfortunately, I didn't have escargot. I only had lamb.
Lamb's pretty good.
Lamb is delicious. And beef was very expensive as well because, farmers would have 100 sheep and 1 cow. So to slaughter that 1 cow, you must pay a lot of money. And so I only had steak once as a kid. But then I come here, like
You
lamb
got
is
every
lamb
meal,
is
yeah.
rare, exactly. And so it's an interesting dynamic. And I didn't really think about it, but one of the biggest things that for me that really talked about access to food is actually water access. You know, we grew up in a place where there are settlements that would take and allocate the water to the settlements. And with that, we would not get access to water. So there will be like a week without water. And we would have to wait for rainwater, or we would have to wait until there's really, you know, government releases water to the town. Like they would shut it off and put it back on. And honestly, like that was one of the biggest challenges. And you don't really think about them as a kid. But one of the things that struck me is that we had a refugee come in, and he was from Gaza. And he said, the first time I took a shower in the U.S., I took a shower with water that I can drink from. He's never showered in water that was clean. He was always in seawater.
Right.
So that's mind-boggling, right? You don't really think about it. We take these things for granted.
We definitely do in America take those things for
Yeah.
granted.
But I think people want to learn more on how they can help. And that's why there are all these, like, you know, companies that are coming about water access, especially in Africa. And people are talking about, like, the next water wave as being the cause of migration. So that's also important. What are we doing to preserve the climate and preserve things for water? So that's important.
How do you feel when you, I get comments from people sometimes on, you know, the kind of stories that I write, you know, they don't shy away from race and all that. You know, food has nothing to do with race, or restaurants have nothing to do with race. How do you feel when you read comments that are like, you know,
I honestly
food
think
is
that's
not political?
I think all these things are bullshit. I think
Right.
food is very political. Food is very much about race. Food is very much about economic security. And it's important to think about it this way. I think because we focus on the, you know, just the superficial stuff. Oh, did this guy go to Japan and therefore he learned how to make, you know, sushi? He comes back. Is that cultural appropriation? No, it's not, right? Because this guy went and lived with a society that technically doesn't really welcome new strangers in very easily. And to live with them for 5 years and learn how to make their food and come back is more like appreciation than appropriation, right? But at the same time, when we come down to, let's say, neighborhoods in the Bronx, and families are poor, and they depend on that one meal where they send their kids to school, right? And then there's not enough, and because we work in a system where like taxes dictate the access to the school education system and the food that's inside, how does that work when they depend on that one meal? One of the things that hit me, for example, in the summer, and then really realized when I was a young kid, is that there would always be this campaign right when school ends, is like, don't let kids go hungry in the summer, right? So how can we work on eradicating these problems? Why our children have to go hungry?
Right.
That's really important. And also, like, in terms of access, like, to, let's say, EBT and whatever, like, the truth of the matter is, you can't buy a hot sandwich. It has to be cold. Like, these certain little rules, they're honestly meaningless in the long run, but they're there just to stop people from getting, you know, advantage to economic aid. It's very much based on race. And that is a problem. I mean, that is exactly the climate that we are in today. People are like screaming, oh, people of color and immigrants and refugees are gonna, you know, take our jobs. They're gonna use our social welfare systems, and they're gonna become more poverty. And that is not true. Truth of the matter is that immigrants have been more successful than, you know, local residents for a long, long time. And two, modes of productions have changed. People talk about their avocados for $2. Well, it hasn't been for like NAFTA and other deals that bring in economic migrant workers to work on these farms. You're going to pay $10 for that avocado and toast. So we have to really look at these things in perspective. And yes, like food is very political. I mean, God bless the World Food Program. Because, you know, they're operating in areas like Yemen, for example, where American-bought missiles by the Saudis are bombing their children, and they have to go with a food truck from one place to the next, and they have to work against every faction, like literally warn them that the truck is coming. So not just the Saudis and the UAE and the Yemenis on the ground, but also these pop-up factions or like random factions that come up, and there's a 17-year-old kid with a gun that will probably take this driver and think that he's from the other tribe and then shoot him. Like these things happen. And then people are starving. There's famine. So it's important. Yeah.
It's a very privileged thing to say food isn't political.
You know, yeah, it's true, it is privileged, but I also think it's because people are just genuine. And I quote Nassim Taleb on this, who was one of my favorite authors. Nassim, although I disagree with a lot of things he said, and he might be really upset if he hears, but he said something that's very true. He said that people don't care about geopolitics. And it's true. People don't care about geopolitics. Maybe I do, maybe you do. But in general, and the mass majority doesn't care about geopolitics because like it's depressing, right? People don't want to hear about it. They're busy, and what can they do to help? And if they hear about something that they can't do anything about, they're just gonna like rather watch something else. And I get it, right? So what we are trying to do, at least as a company, is bring geopolitics in the most simple way. I was able to talk about refugees drowning in the sea through the use of kibbe, then showing migrants, refugees who are drowning in the water, right? Because this is an easy access point. People just weren't more willing to listen on that front and also help because you bring it to them in an easy way. So yes, it is important to bring in geopolitics, but in general, people don't. And how can you get them engaged? How can you get people out to vote?
Right.
I mean, the fact that people didn't vote is exactly why we are in this shitstorm today.
The situation we're in. So during the break, I was like, "Oh, the second half's gonna be lighthearted and fun."
No, never with Nasser Jab, never lighthearted.
And we're in the studio drinking frozen rosés, and like, oh, it's gonna be a light,
delicious. Thanks to Roberto's bar.
Some light topics.
Yeah,
and
frosé.
I feel like whenever I see you, we always end up talking about these things, and I feel like I learn so much.
And I learned so much from you, and I really hope we continue this conversation and collaboration to change the narrative, because if we can inspire one person to take action to change things in their community, in Michigan, in Chicago, in Flint, whatever, like wherever there are places of conflict and places of economic insecurity, then we have done our job, and that's the goal.
So, I have a group of questions that I ask every single guest.
Sure.
So what do you make of today's dining culture? I mean, you've been in New York for a while. Like, how have you seen the dining culture kind of change?
Well, I mean, one, there's a lot of money in New York. So people sometimes spend quite large amounts of money on food, but there's also poverty, and people don't look at it on that side, right? They're like, how can they get access? Like, why is McDonald's an affordable meal versus a sandwich at Whole Foods, right? Things like that. So I've seen it change in two different directions. The first is that I've seen a lot more spending on food in these high-end restaurants, which to a certain level is justifiable on their end, right? But people's palates have sophisticately increased, but also, is it really worth that much money? Like, is it worth to go to a certain restaurant and pay $700 a person? Right? That's like one thing to look at. But, somebody, for example, who has that amount of money says, yeah, it's worth it for me. And sure, that's your right to say that. But at the same time, how can we also empower the people who are living in neighborhoods who don't have access to that kind of capital and change their palate? So one thing that we started doing is bringing in kids from schools who don't necessarily have a lot of money and teach them to new things like falafel or hummus, just to change their palate so they can go back and learn more about it. Because if they like this falafel, then that means they will know more about the Middle East. And if they like this taco, they will learn more about Mexico. And what does that come with? That comes the idea of migrants, that comes the idea of separated kids, that comes the idea of cultures. And I've always been fascinated with people based on their food. And, we take Japan as an example. I feel like Japan is one of the most sophisticated cultures with food. And the two things that when we talk about the Japanese, we talk about their technology, and also including their anime and film, because that's very inspirational, and also sushi, right? So those are important things to talk about when we were so fascinated with this culture.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And that, like, for me personally, like, my whole interest in food started because my mom would take me to get Ethiopian food. And, like, we didn't have much money growing up, but, like, once a month she'd take me to a little mom and pop restaurant in D.C., and, I remember vividly the first time I had Ethiopian food or Mexican food or sushi or Chinese food. It does open your eyes to, the food was so different than what I was eating at home. It was like a very vivid experience.
Absolutely.
For me.
And I think we did it with pop culture. A very dear friend of mine and a mentor, Professor Johanna Foreman, who teaches conflict cuisine at the American University. Recently, she did a small talk in which she actually showed the episode of The Simpsons where they go out to eat at an Ethiopian restaurant. And basically, Marge was kind of scared and didn't know what to do. And then she walked into this Ethiopian restaurant, and she is mind blown by the food.
Yeah, her taste buds start dancing.
Yeah, exactly.
A disco ball comes down in her mouth, and her taste buds are
precisely. Precisely.
I remember that.
And that is powerful. How can we do more of that?
Absolutely. So let's talk about one of your worst dining experiences ever. Can you remember a certain dining experience that was like really, really bad?
So yes, I do remember a certain dining experience that was really, really bad. But not because certain people were bad in it. And I have to really make that. And this is a place that I worked in. And that is Dallas Barbecue.
Okay.
Yeah. So Dallas Barbecue tends to be very busy because it offers dining experience for cheap.
Where is this?
Dallas Barbecue is all over New York, but the one I worked is at Livingston Street and downtown Brooklyn. And this is before Brooklyn was gentrified. And
is it also called BBQs?
They call it BBQs.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
I know
That's
what that is. Yeah.
So I mean, like their entire like model is basically Cisco typed food, and you can fry the wings and whatever it is, and they have the sauces and big sugary drinks. Like that's the thing, and people love it. People do love it. They're very busy. They have a very good business model. The place works like a knife when it comes down to how it's executed in the kitchen. So they're good on that front. But at the same time, there is a lot of culture inside that is honestly awful. For example, like there is homophobia, there is racism, there is just cultural like attack. I mean, if you look at just Dallas Barbecue online, you'll find 3 pages on Google of lawsuits and like even news from Grub Street and Erie talking about like how just like racist like the managers and the waiters and everybody could be. And the reason behind that is that because and this is a perfect model when we talk about how economic security is important to food. Dallas Barbecue offers a place where people, for the most part, who don't necessarily have a lot of money can have a dining experience, right? And get a lot of value for their money. So this is the positive side. The negative side is that people who come from that come from a different kind of environment, which can be hostile. The way people talk to each other. For example, people didn't tip, right? So there would be a lot of racism that
Are you saying black people don't tip?
No.
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you.
What I'm saying is that because of that, but I'm glad that you brought that up, but because of that, like people would get racist.
Right.
Right? Inside. Although both the waiter and the guest happen to be from the same race. Right. And this is where it comes down to. So that was to me a perfect model on like why economic security is important, why we need to change the path, but also the food itself. Like diabetes, heart disease is very much a big problem of Middle Eastern and African Americans and even Latino, right? Because look at the food we eat. Look at the access to the food we eat, right? And not to say that the cuisine is like that. The cuisine is not like that, but access to buying the actual goods, right? So when you go out to eat and you're eating wings that filled with honey and barbecue and a 40-ounce pina colada that's filled with sugar.
40 ounces?
Yeah, it's like a huge drink or whatever it is. I mean, I can't remember the exact. Wow. But it's definitely huge, right? Mm-hmm. And what's going to happen, right? You're prone to certain types of diseases. So it's a case study of...
So your entire time working there is your official worst dining experience?
I would have to say yes, but I'm also at the same time thankful because I was able to earn money and sustain myself and like feed my family. So I'm not necessarily saying it's all bad.
Right.
I'm saying that it allowed me to see...
Well, it opened your eyes, yeah.
It opened my eyes to see the geopolitical conflict of what food and access to food happens. Like, to give you an example. To know, like, that, restaurants usually in, like, around January, they're slow, right? Because people have filed their taxes. Mm-hmm. And it was the opposite at Dallas Barbecue. Because, refunds would come. So we're talking here about class struggle. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
It happens about class struggle. And that's important. Access to capital is important. That means access to capital with food. People want to go out and dine. But they're choosing to spend the money on things like that when they can actually come maybe to us and spend the same money or even less, but get the experience that they can't necessarily afford, in the $500 experience, because we have those chefs. Mm-hmm. And usually those are chefs of color who work at these restaurants who don't necessarily have the access to the capital to, build their own place, like I mentioned, but also because when they make a dish, the credit goes to the chef owner and not them. They're always in the background. The chef owners are barely on the kitchen working.
Right.
They're the celebrities
They're
walking
out.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I get that. People want to get to that point, which is fantastic. But the guy on the line that's doing all the stuff, where is his voice?
Right.
Or her voice in particular? That's really important.
So my last question for you is, if you could have your last meal in a restaurant, where would it be and who is invited?
Oof. You know, wow. Tough question.
Yeah.
The stakes are so high here. Who am I going to upset? So yes, I think I definitely would be around loved ones. My significant other for sure. My close friends, like particularly my friends Chris and Thair. I really would want, they're my childhood friends and I really want them there. And I would love if Judy cooks. Like I mentioned, it'll be like a pop-up. It'll be a Komeeda experience. And I'll have all my friends, Jobber, people who I want, I guess, if it's my last meal and I'm departing from the world, I want it to be a meaningful dining experience where we can share how we empowered each other.
What are you eating?
Well, I honestly would eat a Palestinian meal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Not to say that Palestinian cuisine is my favorite cuisine. It's one of my favorites. I love Latino food a lot. I love Southern food a lot. I love Basque country food. That's my favorite. But I think just for the fact that we haven't been liberated and we still live under occupation, I would love to have that last meal because it goes back to my roots, especially a dish called mlokhiyeh. It's my favorite dish.
What is that?
So mlokhiyeh is a very aesthetically not appealing looking dish. It's called jute mallow.
Okay.
It's an Egyptian origin dish of this green. It's almost like arugula or parsley. It's it's a leaf, and they grind it and then they make it into a stock and a broth, a green looking broth, but it's slimy looking. But it's so good. It is delicious. It's one of the best things you can eat. And usually people eat it with chicken or meat and white rice. And it's my favorite. And you can only get it here at the Middle Eastern supermarkets. But if people look it up, it's like jute mallow. That's the proper term for it. But it's not aesthetically good looking. So even my favorite restaurants were like, yeah, we can't put it on the menu because no one wants to look at that.
No one wants to see it.
No one wants to see it.
What would everybody be drinking?
Interesting. Recently, I had the pleasure of trying all Palestinian wines, even wines I have never heard of. And I knew there was always wines in Palestine, but not necessarily on a level it was commercial. So my friend Jason came down and he brought some Palestinian wines, and they were good. But I do have to say that I am also a big, big fan of Riojas.
Okay.
But there's one particular Lebanese wine that I really love. It's called Chateau Bellevue. The owner of it, Naji, is a very lovely person, and it's a Cabernet Syrah blend. It's so good.
Have all of it. It's your last meal.
It's
bring it all.
Exactly. And tequila. And tequila. Definitely tequila.
You gotta go out with a tequila shot.
It's really one of my favorite drinks in the world. I love it. I love Herradura. I love tequila. I love everything about tequila. And pisco. I actually discovered that recently that I love pisco. So
this sounds like a fun dinner.
Yeah, man, that you're going to be there.
Yeah, hey.
I just hope it's not my last. That's the...
Hey, tequila, I'm there.
Let's do this.
Pisco, I'm there.
Let's do it. One team, one dream.
Well, Naz, I could talk to you all day.
Thank you, me too.
Fascinating, and you always have so much interesting things to say.
You're amazing.
Thank you so much for being
Thank you for having me here.
The first guest of season 5 of A Hungry Society.
It's an honor for me. Thank you guys, and come down to our dinners.
Yes, and check out Komeeda, please. It's Komeeda.
That's correct.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll check you next week on A Hungry Society.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content and to hear about exclusive events, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at heritage_radio. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Rate the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join our community by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.